All right, here's a really nice scarlet oak. This one is huge. This is about the biggest scarlet oak that I've seen around here. You go up, look how striped that bark is. Which of course it's kind of hard to tell because of the lighting in here. It's so backlit. Okay, but that striped bark is really evidence to scarlet oak. Looks very similar to northern red oak. Northern red oak looks a lot like this. Okay, this has some kind of wound on it. Okay, that's what that black is there. It's got this part of the tree is probably diseased, and so it's oozing sap. Okay, this also came up from a stump, and you could tell that it had two distinct trunks at one point, and the one has given up the ghost to the other. And I don't know how healthy it is, but it looks like way on up there, looks like it's doing pretty well. And this other one's not doing quite as well. But if we look down here on the ground, there's tons of acorn caps all over the place. Okay, all these right here. Okay, and I saw some acorns. Here we go. Here's an acorn from this tree. Okay, there's also some blackjack oak around here too, and I'll show you some of that in a second. But see if I can find some more decent scarlet oak acorns for you to look at. Here's some good ones. Okay, here's a really good one. This is this year's. Okay, so it looks different than the white oak. It's not quite as long. Okay, the cap is a little different. Okay, so these are rather where the white oak acorns are kind of elongated. These are kind of short and stumpy, kind of like me. Okay, but that's scarlet oak acorn. Okay, let's see if there's anything else down here. Ooh, cool. So this thing right here, this is called an oak gall. I don't know how well you can see it. Don't want to come into focus. But oak galls are made by insects, okay, that actually lay their eggs on a leaf or something like that. See if I can sit on the ground here, it'll come into focus. There we go. But they look like a little fruit of some kind, but if you were to cut it open, it's just fleshy mess. But what comes out of these is the larva of, or what feeds on this is the larva of a wasp that will grow to maturity inside the gall and feed on the material that's in there, and then they'll emerge when they're adults and fly on and go about their business. Here's a really nice acorn here. Okay, these are already turning brown. Okay, these would be loaded with tannins, so they wouldn't be very palatable. You wouldn't want to eat these. It would probably take a lot of soakings to get all those tannins out to where it would be worth eating. Okay, but deer and turkeys and all those things will eat these once the white oak acorns are consumed. And really and truly, these are actually more nutritious. They have a higher nutritional value than the white oak acorns do, as long as you can tolerate the taste. Here's a different pine. This is yellow pine, or shortleaf pine. It's another name for it. Okay, and look how big this thing is. And notice the difference in the bark, okay, compared to the Virginia pine. The flakes are much larger than what you'd see on Virginia pine. And they kind of start out big on Virginia pine, and then you go up the tree and they get small. But this, they're large all the way up. Okay, and the needles, we can't get to the needles because it's so high up in the tree, but I can probably find a cluster of them down here on the ground. Yeah, here we go. So these needles are some that have dropped off over time, and just like the or unlike the Virginia pine, these have 3 to a bundle. Okay, see how well you can see that. The needles are longer. Okay, they also have a twisted appearance to them. Okay, but it's that length that really gives them away as far as being yellow pine. Okay, if we look around here, see here's a cone or set of some cones that have dropped off. Okay, they have these bigger, thicker cones compared to the small cones that you would find with Virginia pine. Okay, so this is yellow pine or shortleaf pine. There's a whole bunch of stuff down here. I think I'm looking way up in this tree, and it looks like there's some kind of a nest way up in there, and I'm not sure if I can even see it from where I'm at. Yeah, there's a big old nest of some kind way up there in the tree. I don't know how well my camera can pick it up. It may be a hawk's nest or something like that. It's just hard to tell from way down here, but it would certainly be worth keeping an eye on. So I don't know what that is, and I can't climb up there to find out, but you can see the difference between that and Virginia pine. There's Virginia pine right back over here, but when you look in the canopy you can tell a difference in the way they look. The yellow pine's thicker, and then the Virginia pine looks kind of scrawny by comparison. Interesting stuff. Alright, so we were talking about black cherry earlier. Here's a good look at its bark. Okay. So it's got these big, look, it's got these little spots on here. These are lenticels, like we talked about. Okay, which are part of the breathing system that these plants have. It allows for some gas exchange, and these are probably no longer needed anymore. They're stretched, and but would have been useful when it was small, but they still add texture to the bark. But notice it has this gray and white pattern. It's broken up by these black lines that appear in here. But black cherry always has that characteristic look. It's got those lenticels scattered on the bark. Okay, also over here there's some hickory. Okay, this is a mockernut hickory, and I know that because it's got these great big buds on it that haven't grown out yet. But also can look at the leaves. Okay, I'm looking at these. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Okay, again, this is a compound leaf. Okay, so it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leaflets. Okay, which is common for mockernut hickory. Okay, but it's compound. Okay, the leaf margins are entire, and I think we discussed before, they're opposite leaved. Okay, so the leaf arrangement is opposite. Okay, here's the, if you want to look at it a little closer, there's not any really big hickories in here. Okay, this is kind of what this one looks like as far as the bark goes, and as they get older they kind of will get a little bit more scaly looking, but they always kind of will have this general appearance. Now, hickory is a very hard wood. Use it for axe handles and things like that. They also use them for drumsticks, which is one of the reasons why I like hickory, being a drummer. So I love these trees. I grew up with hickory trees in my yard, and I just have a love for them. And the great thing about mockernut hickory, it's one of the sweeter nuts as far as what different hickories put out. Some hickory nuts are rather bitter, but mockernut hickory has a really sweet taste. And if you want to take the time to dig the meat out, which can be rather aggravating, you know, that's good. You had to take a hammer or a rock or something like that to bust them apart. and then it requires some patience digging out the good stuff from out of the shell. But they're good. They're really good for you. They're high in proteins and oils, so it's a really good food source as long as you can take the time to get the meat out of there. Okay, now here's a different oak. We haven't seen this one. Okay, this is called blackjack oak, and blackjack oak seldom gets much larger than the one that you see here. Okay, but blackjack oak is a little different because its leaves are kind of funky shaped. Okay, they're kind of wide at the tip and then narrow at the base, sort of bell shaped. I guess would be the best way to describe it. Okay, blackjack oak is probably closer related to black oak. Okay, and these are in that red oak group, if we were going to group them. But a way to tell blackjack oak, if you turn it over, it's loaded with this fuzz. It's got this downy fuzz on it, and where I've scraped the leaf, you can actually see where I've scraped that fuzz off of there. Okay, so it's kind of pubescent on the underside with those hairs. Okay, the top side is glabrous. Okay, so it doesn't have any hair. But then if you look at the twigs have some hairs on them. They're rather pubescent, but you can see the bud for next year's leaves. Okay, but this thing's loaded with hairs all up and down that twig. Okay, you look at those buds on the top portion, that terminal bud. This is where the new growth will come out from in the spring. Okay, but this is blackjack oak, and these leaves are the way to remember this particular oak. They're kind of bell shaped. Okay, blackjack oak. All right, so here we got another one of the white oaks. Okay, this is called chestnut oak. Okay, it's called that because the leaves look very similar to chestnut tree. Okay, but it's not a chestnut, it's an oak. Okay, and remember that with the white oaks, the teeth are rounded, and that's what you see here, rounded teeth. Okay, so this is how we know that it's a member of that white oak group. Okay, chestnut oaks have these giant acorns, and this one is a little bit young, so it's not gonna have any acorns. There's probably a fairly large one around here somewhere, maybe behind me or something. I'm sure it's not too far away. But chestnut oak, they get really big. They, I mean, I've seen some chestnut oak that were 200, 250 years old, and about 5 feet in diameter, so they can get quite large. The acorns get big. A lot of things like wild turkey and deer will eat those, but usually the chestnut oaks are the last ones to be consumed by many things, because they do tend to be a little on the bitter side compared to that of white oak. So it's not quite as preferable as white oak. But this is chestnut oak, Quercus montana. So speaking of chestnut, this is an American chestnut, and at one time this was the dominant species in the southern Appalachians along with oaks, until the chestnut blight hit and pretty much wiped it out, and then the hickories took over in terms of dominance. Now, when I say it wiped it out, pretty much all those magnificent trees died when the blight attacked, and the blight is caused by a fungus, okay, that attacks the tree. But the roots remain intact of these once awesome giants. And so what will happen, a lot of times they'll grow up to a certain size. Sometimes they'll actually get large enough to flower and even have nuts. But most of the time, they don't get a lot bigger than what you actually see right here. Okay, but there were once an important mast species in the forest, along with its smaller cousin, chinkapin. Okay, but these trees are unaffected by the blight under the ground, so that's why the roots are able to hang on, and they'll still run up sprouts occasionally. But they're a really neat tree species, and there's just not a lot of them around here anymore. We're really at the edge of where chestnut tends to grow and starts to become less prolific. But occasionally you do find them, but more chinkapin here than chestnut. And if we were to look around, we'd probably find some chinkapin out here. Okay, a rather uncommon find that we have for this area is this right here. This is called Carolina hemlock. Now, we saw eastern hemlock over on the other part of the trail, but Carolina hemlock is a little more uncommon in the Piedmont. Generally, you find it more in the mountains, growing up on bluffs and cliff faces or the sides of cliffs, places like that. But occasionally you will find it scattered around in the forest. And the reason I know this is Carolina hemlock is because the needles are kind of going off in multiple directions, whereas with eastern hemlock, the needles tend to be all in one plane, kind of opposite of each other, just kind of flat. But Carolina hemlock generally has a bushier appearance than eastern hemlock. Both are impacted by the hemlock woolly adelgid, and I'm sure this one is infested as well. But it's just got a bushier appearance than its cousin, the eastern hemlock. Both are considered to be keystone species in that they support the ecosystem. They're the dominant thing in their ecosystem, and there are many species that rely on them for their survival, and that's why it's called a keystone species. In this situation, it's probably not a keystone species in this forest because it's just not a dominant species. But that does not lessen the importance of it to the forest. Okay, it's just not considered something that would be dominant here, given the other species that are found here. So all things in the forest have their importance to something else. Everything's part of the general ecosystem, and this dead maple here is no different. Okay, you can see there's all kinds of things growing on it. Okay, all kinds of fungi. Look down at the bottom there, it's got these fungi growing on it. But notice right here, this is where a pileated woodpecker has been kind of working it over. It's been looking for the bugs that are inside there, and these woodpeckers are real cool because they'll get up on the tree and they'll cock their head and they'll put their head right up against the tree, and they listen for where the bugs are inside, and then they'll peck until they find the bugs, and then they'll pull them out of there and all that. But if you look down on the ground, these things are like little lumberjacks. Look at all the chunks of wood that have fallen from where that beak was hammering in there. They're quite destructive as far as what they do. But all trees are large, what we call a carbon sink. So they're full of carbon, because all living things are carbon beings or organic. And carbon gets stored in trees for a long time. And sooner or later, that carbon has to be recycled, okay? Because that's an ecological process that's necessary, because there's not any more carbon being made. What's here is here, but it's always bound up in something, whether it's in the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide or found in living things. In this case, non-living things. So all that cellulose that those cells are made out of, those cell walls, okay, contains carbon, because cellulose is a complex sugar. And so all this carbon, as this tree rots, will be recycled in the ground. Okay, so it's a very important process. So with these things that are growing on it and that are helping to decompose it, this helps to free up that carbon so that it can be used by other living things. So it's a very important aspect of the ecological cycle that takes place here. Okay, here's one of my favorite trees. These don't generally get very large, and I've never noticed this tree here before, but I'm glad I found it because it is one of my favorites. It's called sweet birch. Betula lenta is its scientific name, and sweet birch gets its name from its twigs. You can actually take the twigs, scrape the bark off, and you can chew on those, and it has a sweet wintergreen taste. And it's said that Native Americans use these to brush their teeth with. So it's got some antiseptic properties, which is a good thing. And it will also, teas can be made with the bark that are good for stomach problems. So the wintergreen taste that you have in there is similar to the taste of Pepto-Bismol, if you're familiar with that. Not quite that strong, but it has that kind of a wintergreenish mini flavor, but it's sweet. But birches all have these volatile oils, and this is not as good as river birch or paper birch, but you could peel this bark off particularly on a larger tree and use it to start a fire with. Okay, these are alternate leaved. Okay, the leaves are what we call doubly serrate. Okay, so if you look at that leaf and the teeth that are on there, okay, for each tooth there's more than one serration. Let's see if I can zoom in there so you can see that. So that's what we call a doubly serrate leaf, as opposed to a serrate leaf. Okay, pinnately veined, but again, the alternate leaved. Okay, the leaves are simple and doubly serrate. Okay, so this is sweet birch. Okay, and you can get a look at the twig over here, or the trunk of this tree. You see all those lenticels on that, or in the bark there. Okay, so it's a way to tell it. It looks similar to beech. Beech looks a lot like this when it's young, but the leaves on beech tend to be a little thicker and have just a slightly different shape to them, and they're not doubly serrate, they're just serrate. Perhaps we'll see some beech at some point as we go through this. Alright, here's a really cool plant. Okay, this is called sensitive briar or sensitive vine. Okay, this is also a member of the pea family. It looks very similar to the flowers of mimosa. Okay, and the flowers are not very characteristic of what you would see with your members of the pea family. Okay, so it doesn't have that standard 5-petal or 4-petaled flower that you would find with the members of the pea family. Okay, but this is a trailing vine. It doesn't climb very high, but it's called sensitive vine because it has a really cool little characteristic about it. And we'll see how well the camera will focus on this. But I want you to watch what happens with the leaves. Let me see if I can draw it into focus here. Okay, so I'm going to touch these and I want you to see what happens. See that? See how they closed? They close up. So it's a really interesting little touch response that the plant has. And let's see if we can do it again with this one. See it close up? And check this out. And it's not really well understood why this plant does this. Okay, it may be some type of protective mechanism that it has, but either way it's not well understood. But either way, it's quite neat to see those leaves close up like that. Let's see if we can get another one to do it. Sometimes the wind will just even brush them and they'll fold up. Let's see here. Look at that. Isn't that neat? And they all did it just by me brushing and bumping the leaves, similar to a way a Venus flytrap would close up. Every single one of them did that. But it's growing all around in here. Here's some big ones. Let's see if we can get another one to do it. Okay, let's see here. Get it kind of focused here. And I'm going to put my hand on it. Look at that. Closing that one. Look at that. Isn't that bizarre? They just almost all of them. Look at that. Watch them close. Isn't that cool? And they do have little sharp spines on them. Okay, so it will cut you if you're not careful. If you were to walk into a thicket of this stuff, it could cut you, but pretty cool. There's some more down there in flower. We can get them in focus. They're not going to focus too well. There we go. Okay, this is called sensitive briar, or sensitive plant is another name for it.